And so, hello, I'm Charles Galda. I lead Vision New England. This is our Church in Action podcast. We talk a lot these days about Jesus telling us in John 17 that when the church is one, the people of God, the people of the world will know Jesus was God's Son and that God sent him. And Matthew 5:16 tells us that when we do good works, the world sees it and they pray and it praises God. So I take that to mean when we are in unity and when we are doing the work God calls us to do, God uses that evangelistically to reach people and they want to know who Jesus is. And so today we're going to be talking about an area of good works and a pretty tough area to be working, and that's human trafficking. And so I've got two very special guests today, some friends of mine, two women I admire and who are doing really important work. Theresa, Leonard, and Annmarie Boulay are on the front line of the fight against human trafficking. They're the founders of the Underground, which is a Connecticut-based anti-trafficking organization, and we'll talk more about that. But at a high level, it educates people about the issue of human trafficking. It raises awareness. It works with the legislators in Connecticut to craft and form legislation. They work with law enforcement entities across New England, and they provide care and support for survivors. So Annmarie and Theresa, thanks so much for being with us today. Before we get, I just gave a little bit of an overview of what you do in human trafficking or fighting human trafficking. Can you just give a little bit of a blurb, each one of you, of what else you do? Because both of you wear a lot of hats in ministry and other places. Annmarie, can you start?
Sure. Thank you. Charles, it's so good to be with Vision New England this morning. We really appreciate you spotlighting the Underground and more importantly, the anti-trafficking movement that the church is involved in Connecticut. So my role is twofold. I certainly serve on the Underground team, but I'm also on staff at Winterberry Church. And Winterberry Church is our sending church. And so they're the ones that helped us move this ministry out, and they've been supporting since 2012. So yeah, I'm not sure how deeply you want me to go into my role, but
that's great. Theresa, what about you?
Well, like you said, I wear a lot of different hats. I a range of things that, in a week's time, I've been with several survivors. I've gone in court with them, helping them to support them as they bring the trafficker to justice. And I think that that's an awesome day. That's victory. I also, bring to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. Sorry. I lost my train of thought here. A couple nights ago, I was working with a survivor who had worked with other Christians and didn't have a great experience with it. And, I realized that I may be the only Christian that these survivors may meet. And they don't want to hear about Jesus. They want to see Jesus. So when I'm with them, I show them, the love and grace. And I convey to them their value is something other than a trafficking victim, that on the other side of this, they'll rise to a survivor. I know that for a very, very long time, I thought of myself as a victim. The Underground, we're warriors, and we all have our little place to do it, but I believe we advance God's kingdom.
Amen. Well, let me back up from that a little bit and lay a little bit of foundation for folks who may not know the Underground or may not know much about human trafficking. But could one of you give how do we define human trafficking? Where is it happening? Could you give us a little bit of landscape, whether that's Connecticut, New England, wherever you want to talk about it?
Why don't I do that, Charles? First of all, there is a federal definition of human trafficking under the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. And it is the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for either sex trafficking or labor trafficking. Sex trafficking is defined as a commercial sex act in which a commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, in which the person induced to perform such an act has attained 18 years of age, which means So if a child under the age of 18 is trafficked, or rather, sorry, if they are sold for any amount of money or any kind of anything of value, it is considered sex trafficking. Any child under the age of 18. If we're talking about an adult, force, fraud, or coercion needs to be proven in order for it to be considered sex trafficking. And then labor trafficking is the labor of services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of subjection to involuntary servitude, peonage, debt bondage, or slavery. So what we see in the state of Connecticut, for especially our children under the age of 18, they're more apt to be trafficked, sexually exploited versus labor exploitation. But we do see labor trafficking happening in our state, more so with adults. And just to tell you some of the numbers, the Department of Children and Families did a great job keeping data from, I believe, 2014 through 2018. And on average, we saw about over 200 children every year being reported to the care line and referred as possible traffic victims. Many of those were girls, probably around the lines of about 180 plus were girls, and the rest were boys. We know boys are underreported. And the other thing about this is we saw that rather than them being specifically identified as the Department of Children and Families under their care, they're actually kids that are coming from two-parent homes and they're living with guardians. So over 60% of the referrals that were received in that time frame were our kids that are in our homes. We think sometimes it's somebody else's child, it's not in my neighborhood, it's not in my town. But unfortunately, what we've seen in the state of Connecticut, and it's absolutely widespread throughout the United States, is that every territory reports children being victimized in this way. There is not one city or town in the state of Connecticut that hasn't reported a referral. So all the regions have reported, and we also know that we only know what we know. Not everybody gets as far as a report. That's why awareness is important. So, the message would be, we just have to be very vigilant about this and make sure that we do everything we can to protect our kids. Lastly, we want to share one last piece of data, and that was, it was determined that 80% of the kids that were being referred to the care line, and I believe that was in 2018, were being exploited online and through social media. And so the devices that our kids are using today, it's very important to teach them online safety and how to keep safe when they're on their apps or using Facebook or Snapchat, whatever it is that they're using, because these are access points for traffickers. These are access points where some people who have real evil intentions can access our kids. So it's not that we want to cause fear in our children or even our parents. What we want to do is educate and empower them so that they can stay safe and prevent this from happening to our children.
And so I want to come back to this topic of what I know we call the grooming process that a trafficker will use. But Annmarie, when you're talking about children, can you give us the age range of where you've seen children trafficked?
They say so unfortunately in the state of Connecticut, our youngest victim of trafficking was a little 2-year-old boy. The second youngest was a 4-year-old. That's not the average age, but unfortunately, they have been that young. And both of those children were trafficked by family members. In our state, the average age is 12 to 14 years. That's what we see. So that's when they seem to be most vulnerable, perhaps, or, traffickers somehow start that conversation with our youth, especially online and through social media. And they're just looking for one child who might have had a bad day, or maybe they didn't do a good job on a school report. And so maybe they're telling their friends, I had a hard day with my mom, or, I didn't have such a great day at school. And this is the opportunity. It's just that minor of a vulnerability that a trafficker will start to talk with a child on, and start to have that conversation. they basically pretend that they're good people, and the kids, they're vulnerable and they believe them. And before we know it, our kids are involved in things that they don't know how to get out of, which is why it's very important to educate.
And as much as you can without, I know we need to be very concerned about people's privacy and protecting survivors and stuff like that. But can you share a story, or at least common themes of the story, about how the trafficker got connected, whether that was in person or online, with someone they were targeting, and then how they evolved that into actually trafficking the person?
We work with survivors. We're very blessed to work with these folks, and we do get to hear their stories from time to time. And one young lady, she was 13 when she started experiencing exploitation online, and it was as simple as her going into a chat room where there were other folks, and all she wanted to do was make a few friends and have a nice conversation. And she had no idea that this could possibly happen to her. And there was, sure enough, a man on that line who was disguised as a child. And actually, we've got a great video. I'll send that out to you so that you can share it with your audience somehow. But it shows the whole process of what it looks like for these kids to be groomed. And this guy was pretending to be a youth like her and engaged her in a conversation and befriended her, and over a period of time, she believed that he was a friend, and she went and met him. And that's when she realized the reality of it all. And she started to she was exploited that night. And unfortunately, her behavior changed, right? And what we know to be signs today of a child who's in trouble, back then, I don't think people were really educated. So school teachers didn't know what to look for like they do today. It's mandated, in fact, in our state that all teachers and faculty and many other businesses and industries be educated around what child trafficking looks like and some of the signs and indicators. Anyways, her teachers missed that she was being harmed in this way. Her counselors missed it. Her parents missed it. She actually spoke at one of the in her town where she was trafficked, and I remember her saying, if nobody saw me, nobody saw that this was happening to me, and yet she was desperately crying out for help in ways that people might think this is a problem child, right? When we see kids move from being really good and doing really well to having major problems in all kinds of areas, bad school reports, or maybe they're, there's a whole host of signs and indicators which I could go over, but when we see big changes in our kids, we need to stop and really dig in and ask the questions, and try to meet them where they're at and see what's really happening here. Because she was being trafficked and no one knew. And all she was looking for was a way out. We're really working hard on trying to help kids find their voice if this is happening.
And so there seems to be a theme. I know in some of the work we've done together, I've heard this theme where the trafficker is blackmailing them. They've either gotten to send them stuff or gotten them to say stuff that then they use to kind of coerce them into being trafficked. And then once they're trafficked, they use that to blackmail them. So the kid feels like, I can't go to my parents because they've said they'll kill my parents, or they'll tell my parents what I've done, those kinds of things. And so is that but I think we have this idea, at least I did, that when this happens, the person's been kidnapped. You just described a scenario though where the person's not kidnapped, that it sounds like they're still living at home.
Charles, exactly. And another wonderful guy I know who unfortunately was trafficked at the age of 10, and his trafficker followed him all the way through high school and into college. This man, when he shares his story, talks about the fact that he was a straight A student in his case. He was involved in extracurricular activities, so his parents, thought he was doing some things at school, but what was happening was his trafficker was sending him out to meet other men. This young guy describes the scenario as, again, he was just looking to find a group of friends. He was, I suppose, inherently vulnerable because he was an adopted person, and you know, he just wanted to fit in, and he ended up getting involved in this group of young people who were associated with the trafficker, and over time, this trafficker started to turn him out and sell him for sex, and he fought. The traffickers did blackmail. They scared this young person so much so he never felt like he was safe to ask for help. In fact, still today, you know, he does not feel safe. He worries for his parents, and yeah, there's a trauma bonding that happens, and folks are just simply convinced that they cannot leave this trafficker once they've been involved because of the things that the trafficker is telling them and the way that they're blackmailing and really forcing them and into this behavior.
And
I'm
so,
also noticing now that through the pandemic that you know, now that the strip clubs are closed, we're finding that the managers and also one of or a few of the other employees are trafficking these women. And you know, I was talking to one last week, and she was like, Theresa, this is all I can do. I don't know anything else. That's not her thinking. That's not her voice. That's their voice. Also, I had the opportunity to work with a woman who was, she had answered an ad in the paper 10 years ago that was advertising for women who want to be surrogate mothers. And she went to that interview, and basically what happened while she was there, she was handcuffed to a wall, and she was in an incubator, and she had 7 children just like that. And all she really wanted to do was help someone have a baby.
yeah. And I remember, and maybe one of you told us, but I remember in our work, we talked about just the predator at the mall who just sees the group of kids and has an ability to hone in on the one who could be a target, just bumps into them and makes eye contact, and now watches for that kid again and connects with them again. And they think they're forming a friendship, and more, they're you know, entrapping themselves in a sense, right? Because they don't realize that's happening, but they're getting trapped into this relationship that they're going to have a hard time getting out of and may not be able to on their own. And so how did you guys get into this work? Whoever, either one could go first. I won't pick.
Well, Annmarie came for me, so she's my dearest friend ever. And you know, I didn't believe I was a survivor. I actually, at the time when I was introduced to Annmarie, I still identified myself as a prostitute. And it took a couple of years for me to stop saying that. You know, and Annmarie was like, just stop saying that. That is not who you are. You are a child of God. You are the daughter of a risen king. Because that voice, I heard it for so long that it became my truth. You know, I'm working with my sister, who's awful. She was trafficked and exploited in a different place in a different way. And, you know, I'm doing that, you know, convincing her, putting it out there. Would you have done this? You know, and that healing process has begun for her.
Theresa, I don't want to ask you to share anything you don't want to share, but do you mind talking about how you came to be trafficked?
Well, I was born drug addicted, and so somewhere between, you know, this healing process has brought memories that I never had. And so it started somewhere about 6 years old until I was 12 years old. I was, my mother trafficked me for drugs, and we lived in motels. And when attention was being drawn on what's happening in that motel room, we moved to another motel. And I think it's interesting, Annmarie touched on this. Nobody was even looking. Nobody even noticed that I was gone.
And so how then did you meet up with Annmarie?
Well, I was nominated for women in leadership of the YWCA, and a friend of mine who I worked with said you should meet somebody. She's a pistol. You gotta talk to this woman. And I agreed. Yes, one of the best things.
And
That's,
so
I consider this relationship a gift from God.
amen, amen. And so, so your trafficking as a child evolved into your prostitution as an adult.
Yes.
And that's when you got connected to Annmarie.
Well, I had spent my 20s and 30s in and out of jail. You know, one of the ways that the trafficker had me, and you know, I'm currently working on the overtures regarding women who are convicted of crimes due to me. Like, so if my criminal record, if you were to look at it, there's about 15 failure to appears. Now, what that means is I did not go to court. So what happens is I get arrested for something really stupid, you know, criminal trespassing, some minor, you know, drug charge or something. And so they give me a court date. My trafficker convinces me that when you go to court, they're keeping you. They're putting you away in jail and you're never going to get out. And there's nothing I can do. You have to stay with me. This is the only way I can protect you. And there came, you know, 15 failure to appears off of misdemeanors. And one of the other ways that they keep their victims, I'd go to jail a year, 2, 3, and I wouldn't hear from them. Now my sentence is ending in 2 or 3 months. So now I'm getting letters. Now a little bit of money is getting put on my commissary list. And guess who's there at the gate when I'm out? He's there waiting for me. And I couldn't have done this without you. The place is a mess. And thank God you're with us again. And now I've just become a part of that cycle of I've gone to prison, I've gotten out. I've gone to prison, I'm trafficked. And it really, really doesn't end.
And I know you've shared before, and it seemed to you, because of what you'd been through, that you didn't have other options.
Then
Is that,
you're
is
right.
that fair? And so it wasn't, I think about doing this, but I'll do that instead. It was like, I don't have any choice. I have to eat.
I didn't know how to read or write. Being trafficked as a child, there was no going to school. I had a learning disability, a substance abuse, an extensive substance abuse and mental health background. So yeah, it did feel like that.
So I want to come back to your story, but I want to pause for just a minute because I'd like to talk about the time since I've known you over the last couple of years and what's been happening in your life. But Annmarie, how did you get involved in this?
Yeah. Every story is different, by the way, Charles, for every survivor, I would say. And we're very blessed to have Theresa with us. I got involved back in 2012. Well, I was basically praying a lot about doing outreach. I mean, I've been at Winterberry for about 8 years in women's ministry and love that, and I always will love doing women's ministry, but I also have a heart to do outreach. And I just kept praying about where God could use me. And I was sharing with my pastor about my heart to, well, the Lord had given me Isaiah 61, some life verses there. And, you know, that's all about setting the captives free. So I was really studying that quite a bit in those days. And I was sharing with him that I thought I was being drawn to prison ministry. And that's the day, it was July 2012, where he said, trafficking happens right here. Maybe God's using that as a metaphorical, you know, call. And rather than going to the prison physically, maybe the Lord wants you to help people out of their own personal prison, you know. And he did. He spoke about trafficking on the Berlin Turnpike, and the Berlin Turnpike is in the middle of the heart of Connecticut. I had heard about human trafficking happening around the world, but I did not know at the time that it was happening right in Connecticut. And within a week, the Lord really specifically called me in into this work and with specific, direction through a retreat. And within a few short months, I found myself on the Berlin Turnpike with a team. And what I sensed the Lord having my assignment would be to go to every parking lot of every hotel and motel on the Berlin Turnpike and pray. And so we did that. We did that for 2 years. You probably wonder why, but I had no idea.
I know why you are, because I know you're a woman of faith and you just do stuff God tells you.
and I didn't understand the language of human trafficking, and I felt very offended by the whole idea of human trafficking. It was physically, it felt like a physical assault, like I had a hard time with it. Yeah, my husband often wanted to talk about what's happening around the world, and I just couldn't engage. It's a very hard topic. But anyways, and I didn't want this particular assignment. I remember the first day I was on the Berlin Turnpike thinking it was going to be a red light district or a third world kind of country looking, and it looked like every other street in America. And I'm like, well, if this is going to be my new territory, Lord, this isn't so bad, because there's a Ruth Chris and, there's fancy, some luxury apartments and nice shops. And I was with a friend, thank God, who she was pointing out all those hotels and motels. And, in Isaiah 61, it talks about the desolate places, right? The broken places. And there's certainly these hotels and motels on the Berlin Turnpike, this 14-mile stretch of land. I think there's only maybe 2 or 3 hotels and motels that are in decent condition. Most of them are very broken down. And there were signs of very big signs that there could be some bad things that were happening there. And the Lord just had us stay in this territory. We prayed during the day. We prayed with the car locked and running, right? And we would just sit in the parking lot and try to see what God wanted us to see. And we one day saw 5 underage girls come out of a motel that had just been written about, because there was a big trafficking case. In fact, the first trafficking case, I believe, of the country for underage kids being exploited. We were at Motel 61, I think it is. I'm not sure. I'd have to look. But anyways, we were sitting in this parking lot. I saw these girls come out with 2 older men get into a beautiful SUV and drive away. And it was 10 o'clock in the morning. And I remember sitting there with my team going, what are we looking at? Like, what is this? And I remember we were praying and praying. And I heard the Lord kind of say to me, this isn't a pajama party, Annmarie. This is what trafficking looks like. They have little baggies in their hands. They were dressed in, those comfy clothes that are really basically pajamas. And it was 10 o'clock in the morning. God had sent Theresa to us actually through our prayer nights. So once we started praying on the Berlin Turnpike, I started gathering the churches in the territory to pray. And I would tell them what we saw. And on the Turnpike as we prayed, and I'll say that's when Theresa came. She met us. She heard about what we were doing. We were just seeking God. It was called prayer with a purpose at that point, just trying to ask the Lord, how can the church help in trafficking in our state, in our community? And I was sharing with Theresa one day about how we went out at 10 o'clock in the morning to do our prayers, but we would see a lot of activity. And because of her experience, she informed us, because of her life experience, what we were seeing was in fact trafficking. And I was astonished that anything like that would happen during the broad daylight. And Theresa taught us that, those that purchase sex usually do it between 10 and 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And it's kind of like their lunch hour. And so we were seeing things that, in fact, the Lord did want us to see. He used that as training ground. As we stood in that territory and prayed, we also sought out relationship with Love 146 and the Department of Children and Families, and got involved with the trafficking in persons, and sat on the Connecticut Coalition Against Trafficking. And we went as students, always, for the first 2 years, just listening and trying to understand what was going on. And then as we understood and we started hearing ways that we could help, that's when we started to engage. So that's a little bit about how we got,
I remember I was at Dunkin' Donuts one day, and I had run into someone. We were waiting in line, and she was a high, a high price trafficker basically. She just didn't realize that's what she was doing, or maybe she didn't care. But I was talking to her about what we were doing on the Berlin Turnpike, and she was like, "Oh, that's why." She had pulled back from working on the Berlin Turnpike because there was so much heat regarding what the underground was doing there. We were shedding light in the darkness, and the authorities were seeing it. Stores were seeing it, and then we had the posters we were putting up. So, there was doubt in me at that point of what are we really doing? So we're praying. And, that intervention there, that conversation led me to believe, okay, we're doing it right. This is where God wants us to be.
Now, I know some people will be listening and say, well, wow, things in Connecticut sound pretty bad. Or if you're Connecticut, people will be saying, but I'm in Fairfield County. That's not happening in Fairfield County. Right. And so I know you work real closely with the New England leader of the Department of Homeland Security on this. And he's spoken at some of our events, and he would say, no. And so what's your experience?
Okay. Listen, Fairfield County is beautiful. It's right near Bridgeport, isn't it, Charles?
Yep.
So Bridgeport is the #1 reported territory of Connecticut when it comes to referrals for child trafficking. Our friend Peter would say, and he does say, that this happens everywhere. Like I opened up with, there's not we kind of try to give ourselves a narrative. That's certainly what I was doing for 10 years before God called me in. And it was just the narrative can be anything under the sun. For most people, it's this couldn't happen to my child. It wouldn't happen in my town. And that's simply just not true. Not my neighborhood, not my town, not my child. It could happen to our kids. And it has unfortunately happened to our kids. When we do awareness events at churches, I mean, almost every time somebody reports that what we just described has happened to them. And so, yeah.
And so you just talked about Bridgeport, which of course is a big city in Connecticut for folks who may not know it, but is the implication there that this is an urban problem then? And as long as I'm in the suburbs or rural areas, I'm going to be okay, and my kids are going to be safe.
Well, part of the reason, 20 or 30 years ago, men, women, and children were trafficked through violence. They were feared into, I can't go anywhere. I will be hurt. Now, traffickers are using drugs, get them addicted, and they'll never leave. And that was my experience.
And so is it an urban thing, or do you see it in wealthy communities, poor communities, rural, suburban? Is there any?
Wherever there's drugs, the chances are you are going to find some level of exploitation and trafficking. So yes, it's everywhere.
Yeah, we have served. We have served people in Enfield, Connecticut. We've served them in Simsbury, Connecticut, Windsor, Bloomfield,
Southington.
Yeah, I could go on and on. There isn't a town.
For folks who don't know those places, maybe from outside Connecticut, those are not the major cities of Connecticut. Those are suburban communities, right? And so today, which I think is amazing, the Underground is a network of, I think last time we talked about probably 200 plus churches. And the churches are really on the front lines of serving survivors and fighting trafficking in New England. I don't think a lot of people recognize that. I know you work with DCF in Connecticut. You're a valued partner of theirs, and they're a valued partner of yours. And I remember the thing, but that both DCF has said and DHS has said is because you're not trying to do our jobs, which gets in the way. You're trying to do stuff that only the church can do. And so what are some things, I gave a high level awareness education kind of, what are some things that you guys actually do? How do you do awareness education support? What does that look like?
Well, I'm sure Theresa will add quite a bit. But right now, the underground, our main focus, Charles, is to provide awareness and prevention measures wherever we can. So we supply the state with hotline numbers so that if young people are in trouble, they know where to get help. The churches purchase all of those, and we distribute to the various frontline workers. And, you know, they very much appreciate that. They're in the form of a bracelet as well as a hotline card. So they're very small. If a child receives a bracelet, in the inside of that bracelet is the hotline number, and that would be the National Human Trafficking Hotline number or Polaris. So that's one way that we help with prevention. But these awareness events are typically either at schools or communities, churches, and we basically bring the experts in the state to speak about trafficking and what it looks like in Connecticut and really nationally. So that aspect is how we handle awareness and prevention. We also give a lot of gifts to these kids. So if we know that somebody is at high risk of being exploited or they have been a confirmed exploited child, then we will provide back to school backpacks for these kids. We've done thousands of those. And in those backpacks, why I'm bringing this up is because we put a hotline card in a bracelet. We do not do that for grammar school kids. We just give them a bracelet, but we try to be age appropriate. And what happens is upon distribution of those backpacks, the frontline workers are explaining to the kids how to stay safe, and they engage them in a conversation and let them know how they can get help if they need help. And it also builds up the trust of the child for the caregiver and the child. Then we move into direct supports for victims and survivors. Now we do that both with minors and adults. I just gave you an example of how we support minors through backpacks, but we also do scholarships, enrichment scholarships for children and youth. These are a great gift to these kids. These are giving them opportunities to give them therapy so much. We're looking to give them a beautiful experience that will hopefully start to inspire them to move from the trauma into a new place, right? Because it is huge trauma that they've gone through. So the scholarships are freely given and widely given. Another way that we support minors is through helping the Department of Children and Families put on different trainings. We were just asked to please support the training from the state of Connecticut with cybersecurity, and we're happy to do that. That's thousands of dollars. We're happy to do that. When we support our adult survivors, we're doing that through housing, living, like whatever they might need to live successfully, their food, clothes, support with utilities. And our mentoring program, I think, is such a unique offering in the state of Connecticut, and one that really works. I mean, I know that we have great providers in our state. Bloom is with us through Salvation Army. Siri also does great work, Love 146, and they're awesome. You know, they're great at case management. What we kind of specialize in is caring for the heart. And we do that through a daily, relationship with some of these folks, just trying to help them stand independent. And because many of the survivors that are coming out of the life really want to live independently. And so we believe that that's one of the pathways that I think the Underground's going to help in the state of Connecticut. We also work very hard to bridge partners into Connecticut. You know, Charles, we love Annmarie, and we sought to actually, you were key, you and Walnut Hill were key in bringing Annmarie to Connecticut with our team. And Annmarie should be here within the next few months. And that's a transitional housing program, and they focus on aftercare. So what they're going to do is provide a safe space for those who have been victimized, and it'll be about a 2-year program. And then I believe what the Underground's role will be that place, hopefully, that they'll come to next when they transition out of the transitional house and graduate and still want to live free and independent. So we'll probably pick up where they leave off. The other thing about Amira is they have about 6 beds that they can serve Connecticut with. We know that there's many more that want to come out of the life, which is why it's important to have affordable housing and a good program to help these folks succeed in independent living. It's not enough to rescue people out of this life. It's a beautiful thing to do that, but if we don't have something on the other side for them to step into and a whole pathway of care, they're likely just to go back out in,
Yeah.
unfortunately, exploit themselves.
What I learned working with, oh, sorry, Teresa, go ahead.
You know, one of the things that I do is Annmarie talked about mentorship. You know, I've spoke in many, you know, we've done many events, awareness events. You would be surprised the phone calls I get from Catholic charities, there in West Haven, New Haven, Bridgeport, where people had seen me, took my card, and now I'm getting referred, particularly Catholic charities. In Hartford, West Hartford, New Britain, I seem to have been getting a lot of referrals through those. But that's where my outreach work does with the.
You know, an important learning for me in our work together is that when someone has suffered trauma, which is trafficking, when they suffer trauma, at whatever age they suffer it at, their emotional development stops at that age. And then Theresa, you add into it, and I wasn't in school at that point, so now I'm not getting the basics of home life or school. And so now when I'm coming out of that life, I have real educational needs. I may not have been to a doctor for years, and I've got abuse and things like that. I may not have been to a dentist ever in my life. And I need counseling, and I need housing, and I need job training, and I need education. And so if we, the church, aren't able to provide that to people, then they're still stuck in, well, I don't have any other options here then, right?
That's correct.
And so that's why the housing, and the flexibility around different solutions for housing and tailoring the needs to each person whose story is different becomes so important. And so if I'm listening to all of this and saying, okay, right, I'm feeling God say something to me, whether that's giving, whether that's serving, whether that's, how do I plug in and how can I be helpful without getting out ahead of my skis because I don't know anything about what I need to do?
I mean, thank you for asking that, Charles. I think the church is a powerful force in the work of the anti-trafficking movement. It is the one place where the state and the church can come together and greatly advance this cause and bring real solutions to those that have been victimized in the name of Jesus. I mean, we have the mantle of the gospel message, right? And we're the only ones that have that as Christians in the church. And I will tell you, the state looks for us. They appreciate the partnership. The Underground is known throughout the country, mainly because the Department of Children and Families in Connecticut have earned a HEART grant from the period of 2014, I believe, through 2019. And we were one of their key partners. And one of their initiatives was to develop a faith-based initiative. Actually, they would never say that they developed it, but that they would partner with a faith-based initiative. And so our model is seen throughout the United States as one of success. And I just want to encourage your churches, and we love the fact, again, that we're with you today, and we love Vision New England, and we care deeply about these churches, and all of you could maybe have a bit of a rule, whether it's this type of injustice or another. The church is very important. I was just on with Walnut Hill yesterday, and one thing I always tell our churches is so important for us to stand in these broken places and bring the hope of Jesus Christ. And just as much as we need to stand in those broken places because they need the hope of Christ, so do we need to see what God does in those places. So it's a two-way street. Like, we need to see what the Lord has in these places. And I will tell you, there's a great love that the Lord has to see these people liberated and free. And we have a role in that. We really do. And we shouldn't be afraid. Like, I'll tell you, being able to witness miracles it's always a good day. And I don't want to sound like I'm overstating that, but I'm going to give you an example of the power of the Lord. We just had a young girl, 26-year-old, come to a Bible study that one of our mentor teams is conducting. And she headed in on Sunday just thinking that, she needed a group of friends. And in that meeting, she heard from two other survivors there that were talking about their liberation and the gift of God in their lives. And she identified and realized that she had been trafficked. Similar to what Theresa's story was. Didn't know that that was her story until she understood it from somebody else's perspective. And she identified this. And within a couple of days, she was asking for help to the point where she's like, I do not want this anymore. I want freedom. And if we just, as my friend always says, if we just show up, right, and are available, the Lord, the Lord will have his way, but we have to stand in the gap, right? And because if we don't go, how are they gonna know that there's even a possibility of liberation and freedom? So that's why we go. I would encourage the church to get involved. You asked how. They certainly can contact the underground. We equip people. There's others out there, other agencies that are faith-based that also equip. So if we understood better what a church might want to do, we could direct them, or we could even walk alongside of them. But we do hope that we can see the churches throughout New England, stand in the gap for some of these folks and help them experience that freedom that we've been talking about today.
And so if you're an individual outside Connecticut or a church outside Connecticut and you want to do something, reach out to Vision New England, because to your point, there are groups in other states we can connect folks to. But if I'm in Connecticut, or I'm in Massachusetts, or I'm in Rhode Island, I want to help what's going on in Connecticut. How do I get in touch with you, or how do I get in touch with the underground?
Yeah, the whole idea about the underground is engaging the church. So we're going to be a little bit different from some of the agencies out there. We're just looking for the church to be the church. And so I would love to hear from, anybody who's interested in being part of this, and I can help develop that. I mean, we're grateful to see Rhode Island stand in the gap. About 3 years ago, they came and visited, and we had a long conversation with their team, and today they actually have a ministry of churches in Rhode Island that are standing in the gap for vulnerable youth. It can be done. We have a kind of a roadmap. Give me a call or contact me through the underground or even through Charles.
So website or Facebook page?
Yeah. Our website is theundergroundct.org and
theundergroundct.org.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And our Facebook, I believe, is The Underground Lighting the Way to Freedom.
Okay. And if you can't find them, reach out to Vision New England. We'll get you connected to them. And so prayer, of course, I know you're always asking for folks to pray about this. Opportunities to engage through your church, getting connected to the underground. And what if I want to give? Is it also theundergroundct.org?
Yeah. 100% right now of our donations go to victims of human trafficking, awareness and prevention. 100%. We don't pay. Yeah, that's where our donations go. So if you give, that's where your donation's going to go to. We actually are under the Winterberry Church umbrella right now, but if you go to our website, there's a give tab. We also have a monthly newsletter, Charles, and I would encourage the churches to get connected to that, because that also directs our state in what's available for training, how they can advocate for new laws when we need them to, how they can volunteer, what kind of awareness events are happening, any news of arrest reports or rescues. So there's a lot of information in there. We try to keep people informed so that we stay together, we stay unified, and we go together in this work.
And there's a lot of work people can do to encourage people in their church to want to get involved, so their church plugs in. There's things that it can seem intimidating to get right on the front line of the work you guys are doing, and most of us aren't equipped to do that. at first, but there's stuff where I know you have people who go to hotels and just give posters about human trafficking to the hotel operator because they're supposed to have them posted to other stuff. So there is lower, packing backpacks for kids at DCF with anti-trafficking information in them. There's low intimidation stuff we can do to get started.
Yeah.
That then God may call you to do something more than that, but that's an important thing too. Is that fair?
Yes, it's fair. And one last thing that we can't forget, every child receives an encouragement card whenever they receive a backpack or a Christmas present or anything from the underground. So we need literally thousands of encouragement cards a year, and we have good volunteers who make those. So you can even do that. And it's a beautiful way to have youth groups engaged. We get a lot of youth groups who make these cards, and it's just, there's plenty of things for the church to do that's easier. Yeah, like easier levels. And yet it'll help the kids understand, hey, this happens. And if it's happening to you or a friend, there's help. And realize if you're able to even make a card, you're blessing another kid your age, which is very cool.
And so now we're called to be doing this kind of work as believers. Now, not everybody's called to every kind, but we're called as believers to do justice and liberate the captives, right? As you guys were talking about from Isaiah. But there's an evangelistic aspect to this. And Theresa, you're a great example of that. If somebody wants proof, right, that the work with the government agencies we use, law enforcement, but also the survivors, people come to Jesus through it. And so, Theresa, can you kind of pick up from your story a little bit about your journey out of trafficking? And you've had some really big highlights happen over the last couple of years. And so could you share, do you mind sharing some of those?
Sure. One of for a very long time being trafficked and exploited, I didn't feel that I belonged anywhere, that there was something so divinely broken in me that not even God could love. And not even God could heal. And God has put some amazing, amazing people on my path who, I really think it takes a village for healing. Me and my husband were talking last night, very similar to what you said, dentists, doctors, transportation, a slew of things, that I brought a survivor to a job interview. In that drive to that job interview, she decided that, you know what, Jesus is for real. And we're having the conversation about getting baptized. You'd be surprised, those small opportunities.
Yeah. When I'm rescued from something, right, I think I want to know why you rescued me, right? It's a reasonable question. And so now tell me about the State of the Union, if you will.
Oh, yeah. I was passionate. When I was being trafficked, the online industry really wasn't at its peak. However, Senator Blumenthal and I were connected, and we took the SESTA Act, and it's holding those who are complicit in sex trafficking through the internet. And that SESTA Act took a lot to get there. And, that was one of those occasions where I felt like my voice was advancing God's kingdom. My story was advancing his kingdom, because God does not want his children to suffer in the means of which they were through Backpage, or, unfortunately there's always going to be one, but guess what? It's God will equip us.
And so you wound up getting through all the work you guys are doing. Senator Blumenthal becomes aware of you, and you become aware of him, and you guys start to know each other. He invites you to the Capitol, as I remember.
Yes, he does.
And you testify in front of Congress, and you were his guest at the State of the Union a few years back.
Yes.
And so there's God moving in that, because I know you're sharing your faith, and people, why are you doing this, becomes the obvious answer. And tell us about, you mentioned that you were in and out of prison.
Yes.
So what's your status today?
Well, I've been pardoned. I am no longer a convicted felon. You know, one of the biggest problems, sorry, that was my phone. One of the biggest obstacle is being unemployable. And today, you know, having a record makes it incredibly difficult, having that criminal record to fall out of that area. Like you said, this is all I know. And the most painful thing is to want to get out, and there's nothing to help you do that. Because it is a spirit of freedom that, you know, I went for a job interview and they didn't see a victim there. They didn't see a convicted felon. They saw somebody that was eager to work. They saw someone that had qualities that was employable. You know, being that, and the overtures that, you know, we're passionately working with now. You know, when I went up in front of the Department of Pardon and Paroles, you know, I stood next to, you know, violent offenders, pedophiles. I found the process to be so shaming that on some level I was connected to, and it's not a matter of judgment, but that's the reality, that I'm sitting next to a trafficker asking for the very thing he's asking for. And you know what? And the chances are that the survivor is going to be far more honored to have that and deserving of that.
Well, thank you.
Charles,
Go ahead.
let me just clarify. Theresa is working on, Quinnipiac Law Department is working on a expansion for the vacatur bill in the state of Connecticut. So we're looking to vacate these charges that traffic victims have been brought up on from their records, so that and expunge them so that they can you know, be eligible for work or, you know, apartments or, you know, things that we take for granted. And her point, to Teresa's point, you know, these are victims. These are not, you know, these are not criminals. These are people who have been victimized. The reason why they have a criminal record is because of that victimization. And so we're trying to avoid the pardons process because it really isn't very successful. Although Theresa was able to receive a pardon from over 40 convictions, which is a miracle. It's not the average story for every survivor. And so having this expansion to the vacatur bill will be a good thing for our survivors, so that they can have their arrest records expunged and hopefully be able to have more freedoms to be able to get a job and an apartment. So that's what Teresa's just explaining.
I had given up on the whole process several times. It's extensive. It took 3 years, and a state's attorney, a senator, it's you know, a slew of professionals higher up on the food chain to get me that pardon, and it shouldn't have been that way. And you know, that goes back to the, you know, the cycle of, okay, I'm in jail, I'm getting released, I'm going right back there, because guess what? I only know how to one way to take care of myself. My options are extremely limited.
It's a good point, because there is a rescue the day somebody helps you get out of that. But the rescue, it's incomplete, right? It's because I need that medical care, I need counseling, I need housing, I need training, and I need my criminal record to go away.
Yeah,
right? And that's a great point, and to bringing that to fruition. And so I'm excited for you. I'm so blessed to know both of you. And so thank you for being with us today, but thank you so much for it's hard to put into words how critical the work is that you do. And I just admire you so much. And I'm so grateful to both of you for your leadership in New England. And I know beyond New England, but I know about New England, but your leadership in New England on this. And so thanks so much for being with us. Thanks for helping remind us of our call to do justice, but also that people get saved through it, and how much of a need there is in this place and this space. So I really do appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Charles.
And thank you, Bob Atherton, for being our producer. And thank you for our listeners. And again, if you're interested in engaging, prayer is the first step. The undergroundct.org is another good step, getting your church's attention on this and getting them plugged in. And if you're not anywhere near Connecticut, reach out to Vision New England and we can help you get connected to somebody near you. Our next episode is February 11th. We'll have Liz Babbitt from Johnny and Friends, which is a disability ministry. John Dischinger will be with us from Walnut Hill. It's interesting you guys mentioned Walnut Hill a couple of times, so I don't think we planned that well, a little bit too much Walnut Hill over 2 weeks. But Johnny and Friends does a similar work in a very different place about there are people who are disabled and the church does not always include them, but the world doesn't either. And so there's a great opportunity there to be loving and serving people who are very much in our midst in our communities and want to be part of us. And we just need to be sensitive to it and reach out. And so they're going to share with us a little bit more about what that looks like. So if you enjoyed this podcast, subscribe. We're on Facebook Live. We're on YouTube, Amazon, Apple, Google, and Spotify. So thanks again, everybody. And thank you again, Annmarie and Theresa. God bless you both.